So good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. A very warm welcome to this Chatham House webinar, which is called What's Next for Environmental Peacebuilding? Lessons Learned and Opportunities from Conflicted Affected States. My name is Ollie Brown. I'm an Associate Fellow with Chatham House's Environment, Energy and Resources Programme, and it's my great pleasure to moderate this event today. It should be a really interesting discussion. This event is being simultaneously translated into Spanish. So if you would like to access the Spanish translation, you will see a globe button at the bottom of your screen. And you can press on that if you would like to access the Spanish interpretation of this event. If there is Spanish spoken during the event, if you're an English speaker, you can also choose the English version of that as well, so that you can access simultaneous interpretation in both languages. Let me just say that in Spanish as well for our Spanish friends. Hola, estoy encantado de darles la bienvenida a este evento. Me llamo Oli Brown. Soy investigador en Chatham House y también el moderador de este evento. Este evento está traducido al español. Ustedes pueden acceder a la traducción pulsando el botón del globo en la parte inferior de su pantalla. So hopefully everybody can access the Spanish and the English. This event is one of a series of events launching a special issue of the Chatham House Journal, which is called International Affairs, and it's a special issue on environmental peacebuilding. We had a webinar on water and peace last week. A couple of weeks ago, there was an event organized by the Woodrow Wilson Center in the US, and there's an event to come in Kazakhstan. All of the articles from this special issue are available free to access for a limited time. And Joe will now post a link in the chat to the special issue of International Affairs. So please do visit, download those articles that you're interested in, and read them. There's a whole lot of really interesting stuff there. And this event is also part of a monthly series we do at Chatham House on the links between environment and society, called the Environment and Society Discussion Series, where we bring together leading academics, policymakers to discuss key issues concerning environmental policy. So please do also join us for future events. Our next one is actually in 2 weeks and is on the issue of sustainable sand management, resourcing, and so on, the issues around sand. And that'll be on Tuesday, the 2nd of March. And my colleague Anum will be posting a link in the chat to that event as well. So if you're interested, please do register and please do join us. So this special issue of International Affairs on environmental peacebuilding picks up on many, many different issues. But we thought one particularly relevant angle to talk about was the role of environmental peacebuilding in creating sustainable livelihoods in places affected by conflict. I mean, increasingly, we're recognizing that sustainable livelihoods are critical to successful peacebuilding, and that initiatives such as environmental restoration, afforestation, infrastructural renewal can help create jobs and support peacebuilding. And this is an area that's growing and growing in interest. And you know, from the impact the destruction of infrastructure can have on poverty as a driver of conflict, to the role that environmental peacebuilding can play in bringing communities together by creating sustainable shared spaces of employment, the importance of environmental livelihood creation is difficult to overstate. So to discuss this, we have 3 excellent panelists who have authored articles in this special issue. And we're going to be touching on cases from across the world: Colombia, Yemen, and the Sahel. The 3 panelists are Hector Morales Munoz, who is a research fellow at the Leibniz Center for Agricultural Landscape Research. The second speaker we have is Osenyi Kalelu, who's working as a partner scientist on a research project on climate change and security in the UN Security Council at the University of Hamburg. And lastly, we have Professor Erica Weintal, who's a professor of environmental policy and public policy at the Nicholas School of the Environment at Duke University in North Carolina. And she specializes in global environmental politics and environmental security. So in this next hour, the questions we're looking to discuss are, what is the importance of livelihood generation to successful environmental peace building? What sort of challenges are faced by initiatives that attempt to create sustainable livelihoods? And what are the key lessons for those looking to promote environmental peace building in their work? So those are the broad questions we're going to be focusing on. We only have a short time, so here's the way it's going to work. Each speaker is going to give a sort of 5 to 7 minutes opening presentation. And what I might do is ask a question of that speaker while the next speaker is lining up their presentation. So Hector can maybe start lining up his presentation now. So we'll have 3 presentations, and then we'll open for some discussion. I might kick off with some questions, and then we have a lot of time for questions and answers from the audience. Please do write your questions into there's a question and answer box in the screen here. There's 2, there's a chat box and a question and answer box. Please write your questions into the question and answer box at any time. What you can do, if there's a particularly interesting question, you can, what they call, upvote that question. You say, this is a really interesting question, I would like you to ask this. Please identify who your question is directed to, and also tell us who you are. And what will happen is those questions with the most votes will sort of float to the top, so that I'll be more likely to ask those. With that, let me turn to Hector, who's going to be talking about peace building land use systems in Colombia. Hector, the screen is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Oli, for the great presentation. And thank you very much, Chatham House, for organizing this interesting event. So I'm going to talk about, I'm going to present the paper called Assessing Impacts of Environmental Peace Building in Caquetá, Colombia, a multi-stakeholder perspective. And this is a case that was conducted in a southern region of Colombia that is called Caquetá, which is a very interesting case for environmental peace building because it has overlapping challenges, right? And these challenges are that this is a very important high biodiversity spot. It's the entry point of the Amazon region in Colombia. So it is located in the slope of the Andes Mountains, and it begins when the Amazon basin begins. So it's very rich in water and biodiversity. However, it has been highly affected by the armed conflict. Almost 80% of its population is affected by violence, and it was the main FARC guerrilla territory. So after the signing of the peace agreement in 2016, the political order has changed, and there's been a high toll on deforestation after the peace agreement. The deforestation rates in Caquetá have been staggering, and the hypothesis is that there is a power vacuum. So you can see in the map that there is these deforestation hotspots that are getting very close to natural reservoirs that are very important. There is the Serranía del Chiribiquete, which is a park that is the size of Belgium, which is being threatened. So there has been decades of unsustainable land uses. So the colonization started in Caquetá as landless farmers started entering into the region, even supported by the government in the 70s. So imagine you are a farmer that is displaced by violence, and there was a policy put in place where you can cut forest or enter into the forest to clean the land, as they call it, and then you get a land title. And these uses involve, in the 80s, coca crops cultivation, and also extensive cattle ranching. And there is different actors and power symmetries. So one of the solutions that has been put in place there is sustainable land use systems, and this is this could be put forward as an environmental peace building practice because it involves the allocation of land to different uses across a landscape. And how it actually happens is that there is a design at the farm level where you improve the production, the agricultural production system in a more intensive way, for example, with silvopastoral system or agroforestry involving cocoa. And also there are interventions at the landscape level to connect the farms, and at the market level with incentives such as payment for ecosystem services. So the research question started with, what are the possible impacts of such implementations on peace building? So when you're talking about peace building, it is quite a huge amount of literature, and there are so many factors of peace building, especially positive peace building, coming from structural and institutional change and development, justice and healing, violence prevention, etc. So it is quite important to prioritize. So my research questions evolve into which dimensions of peace building should be prioritized to assess these systems, and how and through which mechanisms are these dimensions being affected by loss. So after a literature review, you can see here in this figure in the axis X, the dimensions that were picked by the literature: socioeconomic inclusion in planning, livelihoods and participation, peace culture and conflict management, governance, transitional justice and security. And I asked different stakeholders and different experts at various scales, which would you prioritize to be dimensions that should assess the impacts of sustainable land use systems. So the results are very clear for the practitioners. They should be the dimension that should be assessed as a contribution for peace building, and also governance at the value chain scale, right? However, the experts in Caquetá, they prioritize more peace culture and conflict management and socioeconomic inclusion over governance. And one of the explanations is that governance mechanisms actually exist there in Caquetá. However, they are far from perfect, and they need more negotiation skills in addressing the conflicts that are present, for example, over land use, more systematically. And also, interestingly, the global expert did not prioritize at all peace culture and conflict management. So as conclusions, the highest dimension for prioritizing the impacts of loss is socioeconomic inclusions, since diverse, inclusive livelihoods increase resilience of vulnerable populations against illegal economies. The second one is governance, which is understood as a process that facilitates the creation of cooperative networks, ultimately resolving land uses and building trust. And in this kind of projects, it is done by the co-designing of the solutions with the actual signing of environmental conservation agreements, forest conservation agreements, and implementing or taking into account the culture of the farmers. And a very important point is the importance to embrace capacity building in conflict transformation and negotiation within the actual project activities. And this is also a critique for environmental peace building, because even though environmental cooperation open dialogue spaces, they are never neutral, and there are very power interests involved. And also the agricultural scientists and environmental scientists need these skills to transfer negotiation skills to their populations. And this could be done by a conflict sensitivity, so the do no harm approach. And finally, the impact of these projects should be assessed according to different scales. So it's very different what happens at the farm level and also at the value chain level, for example, for promoting cocoa as a peace crop. Thank you very much.
Hector, thank you very much. That covered a huge amount of ground in a very short period of time. You stuck very well to time. While Esenia is getting his presentation up, can I just ask you, what, in your view, taking a step back in the situation of Colombia, what are the advantages, the potential advantages of environmental cooperation for peace building? What did you see in Caquetá or more widely in Colombia?
Right. So I think the main important is that the Colombian conflict is a conflict on governance. So environmental cooperation permits the populations to prioritize some issues and to start cooperating among them to create or to protect the territory. For example, in Caquetá, there are these board of to protect forests or to protect water, where they get together to protect the influence of foreign actors, for example, mining projects that could harm the biodiversity hotspots, and also against illegal actors. However, the security is always there, and environmental cooperation may not be enough to the issues of killings of social and environmental activists, which is a really difficult subject to assess or to address.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you very much. Let me remind everybody that you can put questions straight into the question and answer box, and you'll see there's a little sort of Facebook thumbs up thing at the bottom left of each question. It allows you to vote that question as a particularly interesting question. So please do keep your questions coming. And with that, let me turn to, we're going to move from Colombia to the Sahel. We're going to have Oseni talk a bit about his experience of the acacia gum tree as a tool for environmental peace building. Oseni, the screen is yours.
Thank you so much, Oli, for this introduction. And I'm very grateful to be here. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Chatham House, for putting together this event. I'm very thankful for everybody who has contributed to this work. And I'm very delighted to be here with the two distinguished scholars. Oli, imagine the drink you had before we start. It might be coffee, it might be tea, it may be soda. It doesn't matter what it is. Just imagine an element in that drink without which the component of that drink will not stay together, or the color will not be the same, or the smell will not be the same. To everyone who is listening or watching us, I invite you to look around you. Everything you see, everything you touch, your computer, your appliance, your clothes, your makeup may have an element of gum arabic in it. But guess what? Where is gum arabic produced? The gum arabic is predominantly produced in the Sahel, and that's why they call the Sahel the gum belt. What's the gum arabic? The gum arabic is the product that comes from the gum arabic tree. It's the sap that oozes out of the gum of the bark of the acacia tree and solidifies and becomes the gum. I didn't know that. I was born and raised in the Sahel, the village. I saw the gum arabic all the time. I use it. But I didn't know the importance of this gum until I was graduating from NYU, and I was trying to do a research on violent conflict. In my literature review, I found that the gum arabic tree may help lower violent conflict in the Sahel. I was intrigued. I want to test my hypothesis. I want to verify those assumptions. I went to Niger. I couldn't go to the 14 countries of the Sahel, but I went to Niger and I did a field research. I interviewed specialists. I did field observations. I consult the document I could get. It works. The gum arabic tree works. The agronomists in Niger already use the gum arabic. Here is a sustainable land management technique called half moon. And they use the gum arabic tree because the gum arabic tree, or the acacia, whatever name we call it, is the pioneer in the barren land. It helps the other vegetation to grow. And land are getting recuperated in the site. This is a site, a carbon sequestration site I visited. And I saw it works, it's cheap, And it doesn't need a high technique or huge knowledge to produce it. And this is a technique or dual crop, stable, traditional stables, the millet here and the gum arabic here to make the soil more fertile and the land more productive for agriculture. So we have environmental security, with which comes food security, water security, economic security, livelihood strategy, or even I would say national security. So this is about the wealth of West and the Sahel. West which will have more gum arabic if they invest sustainably in the gum arabic. Wealth for the Sahel, because it's a rising commodity for those countries, and a cash crop for the individuals. It is also an opportunity for health, because you don't want your drink that you had to have chemicals as substitute of the gum arabic in it. It's a help for the Sahel, because we can build infrastructure around the investment of the gum arabic. It's opportunity for safety, because as I had my hypothesis and I verified, and I found that the gum arabic may help lower the violent conflict, and with the interconnected war is also safety for the West. So then for the future, we have a tool here that will be used for the environmental peace building effort in the Sahel. But for the future is really interesting if the inclusion of women are taken into consideration, the importance of livelihood strategies, because they may have some little ideology, but the money, that's the main drivers for those young people to go and be recruited by armed groups. The multidisciplinary approach in peace building efforts, the opportunity for dialogue between the stakeholders. But I found out that the animal herders and the women and the youth are the main individual involved in the collection of the gum arabic and bring it to the local market. So we have a tool here to make community to talk to each other. And thank you so much.
Osenyi, thank you very much. I mean, this really sounds like an absolute wonder material. If I understood you correctly, it potentially provides jobs. It provides carbon sequestration, so helps mitigate climate change. It is potentially a peace building tool. It's an important additive for all sorts of different products around the world. I guess my question is, what are the challenges to using gum arabica in this way? What are the challenges that's faced with sort of expanding the use of gum arabica in the Sahel?
The challenge might be the fragility of those states, and I would say by the government. I would say mismanagement of natural resources, land grabbing. With the importance of the gum arabic, the land may be more valuable. The elite with more money may buy more land and leave the poor landless. And multinational companies may invest in the gum arabic. It's like you may fix one problem, the other hand create another. That's why it's better to talk to the people on the ground and have a more sustainable investment in the Gom Arabic. But it works.
Excellent, Aseni. That makes a lot of sense, and I think that's true with a lot of different environmental peacebuilding interventions. Is that it can have a positive impact, but it can also be a double-edged sword. If you're not careful, it can have negative impacts in the way that it's rolled out. So thank you very much for taking us to the Sahel and giving us a sense of the role of Gum Arabic in the Sahel. So let's move again further east to Yemen. Erica has been working on the impact of the war and the targeting of civilian infrastructure. So perhaps talk about that from a sort of more negative point of view of how that undermines livelihoods. Erica, over to you.
Thank you, Ali, and thank you to Chatham House for hosting us today. This is really exciting to be able to share several of the articles from the special issue that came out in International Affairs. And the piece that I am presenting is co-authored with Jeannie Sowers at the University of New Hampshire, and it is on the humanitarian challenges in the targeting of civilian infrastructure in the Yemen war. And I want to begin actually by just framing this within the literature on conflict and peace building, just because most of the articles that are being presented today have focused on the opportunities from leveraging the environment and natural resources for peace building or for post-conflict peace building. But UN Environment has actually taken a much broader perspective on trying to understand the risks and opportunities that the environment and natural resources can play in conflict creation and peace building. And indeed, where today, these articles are looking at some of the opportunities, we also need to understand the risks from destroying the environment or targeting natural resources, or in our case, targeting civilian infrastructure, environmental infrastructure that is critical for livelihoods and for human security and civilian welfare. And so, just to give a sense, this comes from a report from UN Environment, where this article on Yemen is really focused on looking at the environment as a weapon of war, looking at the damages that ensue during conflict, but also that is the baseline from where we begin when we start to rebuild. And so this provides the foundation for any post-conflict environmental assessment that will take place at war's end. And it provides the lens into which we need to understand the damage for then helping to rebuild livelihoods, job creation, fostering cooperation, restoring basic services such as water, sanitation services. So Yemen has been in the news quite a bit. It has been called one of the greatest humanitarian crises of the last, decade. This is a conflict that has led to tremendous food insecurity, malnutrition. It has put Yemen on the brink of famine. The world, the FAO has, looked at the different, the different types of food insecurity within Yemen. There are people in Yemen that are facing, phase 5, facing catastrophe. Other people are in a state of emergency. But it's also a health crisis. Yemen has experienced tremendous outbreaks of cholera over the last 5 years. And so much of this is related to the targeting of civilian infrastructure, and that will be the focus of this talk today. But also in the talk, in the paper, if you're interested, we look at the challenges this then raises for humanitarian organizations that are trying to respond to the humanitarian crisis. And what we do in this paper is we look at the targeting of infrastructure by sector over nearly a decade to try to understand how different actors are targeting different types of civilian infrastructure and how those patterns have changed over time. And so we look at the targeting of energy infrastructure, water sanitation, transportation, health, agriculture, and fishing, because those are critical livelihood sectors. And we use a wide array of databases that we talk about in the paper to try to, to be able to triangulate the data to make sure that we're not double counting, but that these incidents are accurate. As you can see too, what I'm trying to do just in this brief presentation is just showing some of the visuals from our collection of data. And as you'll see, a lot of the targeting of infrastructure is concentrated where there are large concentrations of populations, so near cities, but also near the port area in Al Hudaydah. We're also talking about blockades that have prevented the import of critical food assistance, humanitarian assistance, and the different dots represent different sectors that have been targeted over time. So you can see everything from agriculture to energy to health, transportation, and water again. What is so striking about Yemen and the other wars in the Middle East, including Syria, is the wide-scale destruction of the agricultural sector. And often when we talk about the weaponization of the environment or natural resources or infrastructure, there's always a focus on energy and water. Those two often jump out. We've heard a lot about the targeting of dams in the Iraq War. We hear about wars over oil. And these wars that are becoming protracted wars in the Middle East are really highlighting the vulnerability of civilian populations when their livelihood resources are destroyed. And so, there is this confluence too between the loss of livelihoods that leads to internal displacement, compounded by these blockades that are fueling this humanitarian crisis, along with some other economic variables, such as currency depreciation that has taken place over time. What we do is also look at who's involved in the destruction of infrastructure, and just looking at how this has changed over time. You will notice early on that there was a lot of non-state actors were involved in the targeting of infrastructure. These actors often focused on the sabotaging of oil and gas pipelines, electricity installations in Yemen. And I should note, Yemen was heavily dependent on oil revenues. And so targeting oil and gas is a way of cutting off, the important funding lines to the government. But over time, with the Saudi-led coalition coming in, you will see a greater amount of these attacks being led, airstrikes being led by the Saudi coalition. Just to highlight the importance of livelihoods in agriculture, why we're focusing on this, especially in this special issue. In Yemen, 70% of the population lives in rural areas. Over 50% are employed in agriculture-related activities. Often this includes women. So we were tracking, the targeting farms, markets, flour mills, fishing, because of the importance of the fishing economy, livestock, and looking at, again, how this undermines livelihoods, but also recognizing that the targeting of infrastructure can't be siloed. These are sectors that are linked and have reverberating effects. So if you target electrical facility, that can harm water and sanitation, it can harm medical facilities. And so the importance of having an intersectoral approach is critical. And with that, I'm just going to conclude. Thank those that have been funding us over the years, and we'll turn it over to Ali for discussion for Q&A.
Erica, thank you very much indeed. You're talking about really worrying stuff in terms of the collateral impact of conflict and damage directly to agriculture. What I wanted to do was sort of turn to the turn to the sort of open discussion. We've got lots of really interesting questions have come in. We've got about 25 minutes. I'm going to start with you, Erica, because you were just talking, and I'm going to link my own question with a question that's come in from Mara Tignino of the Geneva Water Hub. So she was asking, what do you mean by agricultural infrastructure? Do you see that as water wells? Does that also include agricultural infrastructure? And if I can just tack on my second question on this, is a broad one. Do you think it's becoming more acceptable, or you know, is it more common that conflicting parties are targeting the civilian infrastructure? Is it becoming more common or less common? And what can be done to change those norms over what is seen as acceptable action during conflict?
So this is where it becomes tricky with how we classify the targeting of infrastructure, and trying to keep, you know, water separate, like wells, water wells we classify as water, even though they could have multiple uses. They can be used for drinking water, they can be used for agriculture, and really look at, you know, when we're talking about agriculture, talking more about the targeting of agricultural land, livestock. It could be trees in Palestine that have also been uprooted at times. There have been attacks on burning crops throughout the Middle East, but recognizing that these infrastructures are linked, and, you know, drying up a well will then affect agriculture, or poisoning a well, then livestock can't drink from that water anymore. So it's in many ways, that's why we've expanded the type of infrastructure we look at over time, because of these linkages. Regarding, you know, what can be done, I think we can have a large conversation. I think you're involved in some of this, Ali, too. And Mara is also involved in this with the Geneva, someone needs to put it in the chat for others, the Geneva Water Principles that try to lay out, you know, protections in war for not targeting water installations. And so there is increasingly attention being paid to the importance of civilian infrastructure and their protection, also through the UN, the International Law Commission, looking at the protection of the environment. The ICRC is doing work in this area. So there's a large body of literature that is developing, recognizing that attacks on infrastructure are in some ways, you know, have impacts for human security and civilian welfare.
Great, thank you very much. Let's turn to Hector now. I have a question from Peter Tibber, who's asking, saying you were talking, Hector, about local cooperatives as the key to effective governance. And he's interested in, how would you compare the importance of local initiatives versus the effective presence of the state in countering some of these conflicts over environment, natural resources, land, and so on?
Right. Well, thank you very much for this question, Peter, because this is actually something that is kind of I see as the future of environmental peace building, trying to see how these bottom-up approaches are interacting with the state, the policy, if there could be a policy of environmental peace building somehow at the state level. And actually, I'm working on a new article right now, and I see that there are some uncoordinated responses. So I'm going to refer to Colombia, and there are many initiatives at the local level to protect water, to protect forests, to embrace cooperatives among farmers. And however, due to international pressure, the Colombian government is taking some initiatives to quickly stop deforestation, which involves military action. And this sometimes goes in detriment with initiatives at the local level to negotiate with farmers, etc. So it is needed the presence of the army and the security forces and the judiciary forces there. However, if this is done undermining the local governance mechanisms that are there, or in an uncoordinated way, it could be not unintended sometimes, but it is very needed to coordinate this and to address what is happening at the local level. And it happens not only going global to local, but also national to local, especially in these highly affected, vulnerable areas.
That's great, Hector, and that touches on many of the points and the questions that we've had about top-down versus bottom-up approaches. Let me come to a question from Troy Fielder for Senyi that I'm also going to link with another question from Mara. So Troy is asking, how do we ensure that the benefits of gum arabic are accrued to local people rather than some of these bigger corporations? And I guess linked to that a little bit is how can you include women in decision-making processes in the Sahel? A question from Mara. So Osenyi, how can you ensure that local people benefit from gum arabic, and how can women, be involved in decision-making processes?
Well, thank you so much. Great question. I think first of all, we need to inform the rural inhabitant about the importance of the gum arabic. Like I said before, I saw the gum arabic, but I really didn't know the importance of it. Maybe cutting the middleman and trying to get the village farmers, the animal herders that collect and bring it to the local market, that the investment goes straight to them. And really trying to talk to the people, put people in the center of the decision maker. That was with your second question. People are involved, what they really need, instead of just patching something from somewhere to the local community, which may not fit with the reality on the ground. Women empowerment probably is traditional, trying to get the traditional leaders get involved and sort of awareness of the importance, because the women are demand collectors, and women are very involved in informal business, out of business, and the gum arabic. So it's very important that the involvement of women in the peace building effort around the gum arabic. So that's what I will say about that question.
Great, thanks, Osenyi. So yeah, important to bring the benefits back to local people, particularly women, given their important role in resource management. Turning to Erica, I'm going to try and link another couple of questions. There's one from Natasha on sort of, when you look at the conflict in Yemen, do you see a changing pattern in the kind of services targeted? And then linked to that, there's another question on, do you see communications, a question from Simon Burkett. Did you identify the targeting of communications infrastructure in agricultural areas? So questions around how have these infrastructures been targeted and how has it changed over time?
Great. If you look at the article, we will lay out in greater detail what infrastructure has been targeted and the databases that we use, because we draw on particular databases like the Civilian Impact Monitoring Project or the Armed Conflict Location Event Data Project, ACLED, or the Yemen Data Project. And we haven't been looking at communication data, largely because this is really about focusing on environment, natural resources in the beginning and expanding it to broader civilian infrastructure, just recognizing how important health infrastructure is in medical clinics, which isn't necessarily what would fall under the rubric of water or environment or natural resources. But once you start looking at the linkages between infrastructure, you just can't leave out health when you're looking at access to water and access to electricity and the well-being of the civilian population. So we did not look at communication infrastructure. So the patterns over time, as I mentioned earlier, early on, it was very much focused on energy infrastructure. Again, the targeting of pipelines, refineries, just because that is the revenue source, an important revenue source. Over time is where we see the increased targeting of agriculture, water, and medical facilities in particular. Part of this too is there is a bias in the data, just because there was more data that was being generated after 2015, after Saudi Arabia and the coalition entered the war. And so you see more targeting through the use of airstrikes on what would be basic services and agriculture, livelihood resources, but also medical facilities. There is a deconfliction mechanism that exists that the UN coordinates to basically provide geo coordinates to the different parties to the conflict, so as to protect medical facilities, for example. But there have been numerous instances in Yemen where you see medical clinics run by humanitarian organizations being attacked. And so that's what we've been seeing over time.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's disturbing stuff. Let's come back to Hector now. And again, I have a really interesting question from Louise Winstanley from ABC Colombia, who's asking, and I guess this is at the core of a lot of environmental peacebuilding practice, which is how much is socioeconomic inclusion in this region of Caqueta in conflict with biodiversity, and in what ways is it in harmony? What livelihoods are available in this region to develop?
Yeah, I think, yeah, exactly. This is right to the core, and this is where environmental peacebuilding is an interesting solution. So in Caqueta, the livelihoods, most of the people livelihoods depend on, for example, cattle ranching, and they bring the culture, so agriculture. And this, I think, has a lot in common with the populations in the Sahel and some in Yemen, Afghanistan, etc. And in Caqueta, the agriculture culture is imported from the Andes. So they have livestock farming, extensive cattle ranching, and these kind of projects that sign environmental conservation agreements or reforestation agreements on their farms kind of alienates their need for livelihoods in cattle ranching with the land uses that exist in the Amazon, which are not suitable for livestock. But if you do more intensive production livestock systems at the farm level, where you also restore the sources of water, and you make them sign an agreement, or not make them, but you agree with them to sign an agreement that they do not expand further the agricultural frontier. This is an interesting solution. But for example, this is not a super interesting solution in Brazil, because they do already silvopastoral system into the Amazon. So it's actually to prevent them to go further there. But they're in Caqueta, they're also building initiatives to do more research on biodiversity, to create some ecotourism around biodiversity. Some ecotourism also involves former combatants. And there is a huge amount of initiatives there that need to be more coordinated and embraced by the national government. I mean, the national legislation had some advances, but the actual implementation is always tricky.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you. Osenyi, I wanted to try and link a couple of questions around economic development in conflict-affected areas. So, for example, who is it? Let me just get to, we have lots and lots of really interesting questions here. So Patrick asks about sustainable and reliable transport networks to get products to market. And David Simmons asks, how can we ensure economic development drives peace rather than conflict? When you're talking about Gum Arabic, it's talking about economic development in fragile zones. How can you make sure that that is contributing to peace building rather than conflict?
Thank you so much, and thank to all the two attended out, asked those questions. It's really interesting. The infrastructure, how to get to the local communities involved in collection or the growing of the Goma Arabic with the help of international partners, with businesses involved, and even the local government. How can we get those products to get to the local market? I think with the Goma Arabic production, creating cohesion, because the problem, we tend to say that the conflict is maybe ideology, but it's also, we need to look at development. If the young Sahelian is socially and economically marginalized, has no other choice about joining the armed group. If your land is not producing anymore, you migrate to the city and be exposed to violence, or try to move to the Mediterranean, trying to get to Europe, where you're going to expose to other dangers. But if we create development while building infrastructure, local market, routes to connect villages, infrastructure and sanitation, that's a development right there. We're developing the real. So we're going to cut the need to migration. We're going to maybe cut need to join armed groups, and around the production of the Goma Arabic, the social cohesion, the talking to each other is very important. And we're using the Goma Arabic to make the soil more fertile, using the Goma Arabic to reverse desertification. That's a development, because more than 80% of the rural Sahel depends on the land, depends on the market. Farm activity, off-farm activities, all is around the environment. So developing is very important. That's why we need to look at development and trying to make stakeholders to talk to each other around the environmental tools. Yemen, Colombia, the case of Sahel, the Goma Arabic, because the Goma Arabic works. And the Goma Arabic is indigenous, and people already know it's already there. We just need to put that to the wider policies that was going on. For example, like I put on my slide, the Great Green War, the Pan-African Great Green War. So the tools are already there. They aim, they are willing to do something is already there. People don't want to join the armed group because they want to join it. It's just because they have to sometimes. That's why I say there is some ideologies of high level, but the youth is dragged to those conflicts because they're poor, they're desperate.
So if we can change the economic incentives, then we can change the conflict. Thank you very much. We've only got 5 minutes left. We've got a lot of questions. I'm not going to get through them all. I'm going to ask you all one last question in a moment. But before I do that, I'm going to ask Erica, and I'm going to ask you a couple of the really big ones, which is Jeff and Jeff DeBelco and Ian McDonald have asked this question around, is a bottom-up approach more effective than a top-down approach? And Jeff is asking, how can we bring those two together? And I'm going to throw into that Sarah Rose Carswell's question around how can women and men need to work together for environmental peacebuilding efforts to succeed? How can we help and support environmental peacebuilders in this work, particularly those who are targeted with violence and intimidation for their work? So if you can have a crack at that quickly, and then we'll have a final question for you all.
So rather than try to provide long-winded answers, I may direct people to other resources that could be very useful. Regarding the issue of the importance of women and being part of the peace building process. I mean, I think women and men working together is obvious. There is a lot of great work taking place, especially at UN Environment through the work of Celia Hale. So I would encourage anyone who's interested in that to look at that work. Jessica Troll has been doing some of that work at the Environmental Law Institute too. This is in many of the articles in the special issue. We talk about the importance of women having a seat at the table, because often in the negotiation process, women are left out at the table, even though they are the ones who have the greatest stake in having access to many of these livelihood resources, such as water and agriculture. And so bringing them in. As for bottom-up versus top-down approaches, the introduction to the special issue, of which Jeff DeBelco is one of the co-authors, lays out, a whole, it covers really in a cursory way the field of environmental peace building, but makes the case for more attention to be paid to bottom-up approaches. That doesn't mean getting rid of top-down approaches, because you need political will of, politicians and leaders, but paying attention to bottom-up approaches that include also bottom-up approaches, but also, gender conflict-sensitive programming and other tools that should be part of the peace-building toolkit. So I would encourage anyone who's interested in learning more to look at the introduction to the special issue.
Great, thank you, Erica. Final question, 20 seconds for each of you. What would you say is the one lesson you would take from, that you would recommend that people who are interested in advancing environmental peace building should think about in the next 5 years? What is the one thing you would like to see done? Hector, over to you. What's the lesson that you draw from your research for other people who are trying to build peace through environmental cooperation?
Right. Well, since I come from the peace building practice, I think it's very important that the projects that are, when you are programming environmental peace building initiatives, you also take into account actively solving conflicts, and not only using environmental cooperation as a space for discussion. So actually designing dialogue processes, embracing negotiation skills, and also when you are talking about livelihoods, you also need to address global challenges. So if you are building a zero deforestation value chain, it does not work if the global consumption patterns that do not change, and if you do not integrate these accordingly.
Great, thank you very much, Hector. Osenia, you've had 20 seconds to think of your answer. Over to you. You're still muted, Osenia.
Okay, I would say really quick multidisciplinary approach. Look at development, environmental degradation. Look at gender. Look at every aspect and put together, and let shareholders talk to each other and listen to the local people. Thank you.
Great stuff. Thank you very much indeed. Erica, last word is yours.
I'm going to build on what Husseini said. What I've always been taken with in just reading case studies is the importance of the informal sector, because that you see many instances of individuals, communities demonstrating tremendous resilience and adaptation, but like the water sector, just being able to find other means through, private vendors that supply water. And often when peace builders come in, they want to erase the informal sector and rebuild formal institutions rather than thinking about how to incorporate them into the peace building process.
Great. Thank you very much. Excellent last words. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for your really insightful presentations, for sharing your work, your wisdom with us. Thank you to Joe Hills and Anam Farhan for putting this event on. Please do join us in 2 weeks. 2 weeks on Tuesday. In 2 weeks at the link that Anam sent around before for the event on sand. And thank you to you all for being with us for this last hour. I wish you a very pleasant day. Goodbye.
Thank you,
Thank
Ali.
you very much. Have a nice day.